The U.S. government has paused negotiations on the expansive Columbia River Treaty.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's comments about one of Canada's most valued natural resources.
You have millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north with the snow caps in Canada and all pouring down. And they have essentially a very large faucet.
40%. That is the share of Pacific Northwest hydropower that runs on Water Canada controls right now. Every data center in Seattle, every factory in Portland, every light switch in Oregon, all of it depends on a river whose headwaters sit inside Canadian territory. And this year, Washington cancelled the deal that kept that system stable for 61 years. They thought they were applying pressure. What they actually did was hand Mark Carney the most powerful trade card of 2025 without him asking for it. Here is what happened. In March 2025, the Trump administration paused negotiations on a modernized Columbia River Treaty. The Biden government had spent years working toward an updated agreement. Both sides had reached a framework. Then the new administration looked at the money flowing to Canada and called it a concession they weren't willing to make. They wanted to use water as leverage in the broader tariff fight. Force Canada to blink, get a better deal. In July 2025, Washington officially cancelled the modernized treaty. The problem is what happens next when you cancel a modernized update. The system doesn't disappear, it reverts. Back to the original 1964 text. And that 1964 text is exactly the version Canada wanted to keep all along. If you want to understand why that reversion changes everything, stay with us. The 1964 treaty is not a neutral document. Under its terms, Canada retains full control over river flow. Canada keeps receiving the Canadian entitlement, the annual payment Washington owes for water management rights. RFI, estimated $250, $350 M+ annually. Confirmed via Columbia River Treaty Office or Global Affairs Canada. And Canada owes the United States 0 new concessions. Washington believed they were withdrawing a win from Ottawa. They were not. They discarded their own negotiating map and left Canada standing exactly where Canada wanted to stand. Carney's government did not fight the cancellation. They didn't need to. When you are upstream with the shovel, you don't make noise, you wait. The reversion trap closed on Washington the moment they signed the cancellation. Ottawa didn't set the trap. Washington built it themselves. To understand the scale of what's at stake, you need to go back to 1948. That spring, the Columbia River flooded and erased an entire city. Vanport, Oregon. Gone in hours. Nearly 19,000 people homeless. The United States realized that day that no amount of domestic dam building would solve the problem. The river's headwaters were in Canada. Flood control required Canadian cooperation. It took 16 years and 3 U.S. administrations to negotiate a solution. In 1964, the Columbia River Treaty was signed. Canada agreed to flood 110,000 hectares of its own land, entire villages, sacred sites, some of their best farmland. They built 3 massive dams, Mica, Keenleyside, Duncan, giving Ottawa the physical ability to control the flow of the entire river system. In exchange, the United States got flood protection and the foundation of the Pacific Northwest energy grid. The numbers tell you why this cannot be rebuilt. The Columbia runs 2,000 kilometers, 60 dams sit along its length. Together they produce 40% of all hydroelectric power in the United States. There are no pipes you can lay, no alternative grid you can spin up, no executive order that changes the direction water flows downhill. This system took decades to build. Replacing it would take decades more and cost hundreds of billions of dollars the Pacific Northwest does not have time to spend. For 60 years, the Pacific Northwest has had the cheapest electricity rates in the developed world. That is not an accident. It is a direct consequence of Canadian cooperation under the Columbia River Treaty. That advantage is now sitting on a knife's edge. If Canada reduces its cooperation to the legal minimum allowed under the 1964 text, not shuts off the river, just pulls back to the floor, the consequences cascade fast. Winter power shortages, summer irrigation failures, and something most Americans haven't considered, 10% of all American wheat moves by barge down the Columbia River, 700 grain ships annually. If flow drops, barges sit. If barges sit, Wheat doesn't move. If wheat doesn't move, prices go up, not in Ottawa, in your grocery store. Replacing the economic output of just one section of this river system would cost an estimated $31 billion. The full system is not replaceable on any political timeline. For a homeowner in Seattle or a farmer in Eastern Oregon, this is not an abstract trade dispute. It is their electricity bill. It is their crop yield. It is already happening in slow motion. Here is the reversal. Carney's government has been publicly silent on the Columbia River file throughout this entire dispute. No threats. No press conferences about water leverage. No ultimatums. That silence is not weakness. It is positioning. Ottawa understands something Washington appears to have missed. You do not need to threaten a card you are already holding. The leverage exists whether Canada exercises it or not. Every time Washington makes a demand on lumber, on auto parts, on dairy, they are making that demand while sitting downstream from a river they do not control. Washington's recent demand lists don't even mention the Columbia River, probably because acknowledging it means acknowledging how exposed they are. Carney refused to renegotiate. In doing so, he may have secured Canada's strongest trade position of the decade without ever raising his voice. There are three ways this resolves. The first path is a quiet reset. Washington returns to the table and accepts a modernized deal largely on Canada's terms,